I don't think so, but that's all right.
Test, 1, 2.
Test, yeah.
We're live.
Keep testing, yep, there we go. I'm coming. And so, friends, I'll invite folks to have a seat as we get ready to engage in our time together here. And it is good for us to make sure we have something to eat, something to drink, and then in maybe about 20 minutes to half an hour, we'll have a pause and everyone can grab a sandwich too. So that'll be good. You're right. I did that last time and it worked okay. So we can try again.
Test.
Thank you for your encouragement. It worked pretty well. So yeah, really grateful that I have the opportunity to be with you here today. By way of reminder, my name is Reverend Scott Reynolds. I'm the Growth Annimator for this area. And some of you will remember that I was here last December. And when I was here last December, we were explicitly talking about welcome and creating a container where we can welcome people into our shared life of faith, and how can we do that really well. Today, our focus is a little bit different in that we're going to be talking explicitly about invitation. And what are some of the barriers? What are some of the things that prevent us from offering that invitation well? And how can we make sure that we do it in a way that's going to be life-giving for us and those we invite? Right? That's what our goal is. And I think it's helpful because we need to know why we might invite someone to talk. Just remind you of a few things that we talked about the last time I was here. The first thing that we need to be reminded of, and it feels quite obvious, but is that we have good news to share, right? We also know that our motivations can sometimes be a little mixed. I named that the last time I was with you as well. The reality that Michael named about the general statistical trend in the United Church of Canada, that's real, right? And that can cause some anxiety in us, that can cause some fear within us to say, hey, we really care about this community of faith. We want it to go on existing for decades and decades and decades. And if the reason that you're inviting someone to be a part of this is, I'm really scared that this place might die, please come with me, that's not going to be effective at all. And so we can recognize within ourselves that that's one of the things that might be motivating us. And it's really important for us to remember that it isn't the only thing that's motivating us. And actually, it's not the most important thing that's motivating us. The most important thing that's motivating us is that we have good news to share with the world. Right? We need to remember that we are inviting people into something good, that we are inviting people into something that will help them to better understand themselves as they come to know their belovedness in God's sight, that we are inviting people into something that will deepen their capacity to live in love, to experience the goodness of God and the goodness of others lived out in community. And we are inviting people into a space where they might be transformed in the best sense by the power and the grace and the love of God. Right? We want that to be our starting point. Right? That's what we're inviting people into, because that's something someone might want to be a part of. One of the things that we know, because there has been research done on these subjects in the realm of spirituality, is that people are in fact healthier, they are in fact less lonely, they are in fact more loving and kind and display more signs of empathy when they are involved in some kind of spiritual community. And it is, in fact, about gathering together and doing the practices. So they've done some controls, right? It isn't actually related to, do you believe in God or not? It's whether or not you actually have a spiritual community where you're engaged in practice together. And so when I say we have something good to share, like, that's actually good news, right? Would you like to be someone who experiences less loneliness? Would you like to be someone who grows in their capacity for empathy and love? Would you like to be someone who is a greater contributor to the society of which you're a part? Like, most people will say, yes, I would like those things. And so when we're inviting people into this faith community, that is part of what we're offering. We also talked about how the core message that we have for people is that God loves you, and how we need it to be that and, right? If people just hear God loves you, that isn't enough for them to say, then I want to be part of the community, because God can love them at home as well as God can love them in church. God can love them watching Sunday football as well as God can love them listening to a sermon, right? And so it's important for us to continue saying God loves you, and it's important for us to say more, right? We need to be able to say more than that, and the more is often the tricky part, right? You're probably reasonably comfortable speaking with most of your friends, and if they say, well, what's your church really about? And responding with something like, our church is about loving everybody, right? Our church is about letting everyone know that God loves them. Right? That feels like, hopefully, a pretty safe response. And then if they say, can you tell me a little bit more? Like, what else is your church about? That's where it can start to feel a little bit tricky for us sometimes. And so that's what we're here to talk about today, right? We want to be able to be equipped so that we can say a little bit more about who we are and what it is that we're inviting people into. And today we get to spend our time together talking about invitation. Right? Why it matters and how we might do it in a way that actually feels like we're doing a good thing. Most of you are here, like you're sticking around because you're committed to the United Church's vision of deep spirituality, bold discipleship, and daring justice. And because you're committed to Kamloops United Church, you're committed to this being a place that is a center for community and spiritual discovery. Right? You don't tend to stick around for workshops after the service if you are just kind of hanging on to the edge. Right? You're here because this place matters to you, because your relationship with God matters to you, and because your relationship with one another matters to you. And so if we want to invite more people to find belonging here, that means learning how to share our stories. And if that isn't something that you do very often, I would encourage you to do it more regularly, right? Share your stories of God's presence in your life and listen to your friends share their stories. In a phone call, when you're out for a walk together, in a coffee shop, and in church. Get into the habit of sharing who God is for you and in your life. You know, in our Sunday morning worship services, including the service that we just had today, we engage in a lot of different practices. Right? We are in the practice of joyfully praising God. And we are in the practice of some of the other normal aspects of Christian life. Right? When we have the choir up leading us in song, we are learning to sing praise together. When we are led in prayer, we are learning how to pray together. When we read the scriptures and then have someone reflect on them, as I did today, we're learning how to read the Bible together. These are some of the core practices of Christian life. Right? Reading the scriptures, prayer, offering praise. And when we gather on Sunday morning, it isn't just practice, but it is practice. Right? We are learning how to do those things. And hopefully, we're taking that into the rest of our lives so that we are people who are consistently being shaped by Scripture, consistently being shaped by prayer, consistently being shaped by an attitude of praise. My encouragement to you would be to find a way to practice sharing your stories of faith as you gather on Sunday mornings. Right? Maybe you get into the habit of having one member share about how God is moving in their life for a minute or two at the beginning of the service. Right? This is why I'm a part of Kamloops United Church. This is how it has changed my life. Maybe you create open space in the service for people to share spontaneously about where they've noticed God's presence in their lives. Maybe you have a brief moment in your service where people have an opportunity to share with their neighbors. Or maybe you say, actually, during our coffee time, we're going to make a point of finding someone that you haven't talked to in the last month and saying, where have you noticed God showing up in your life? And then giving them space to respond. Whatever you do, it doesn't have to be any one particular thing. If we start getting into the habit of sharing about what God is doing in our lives, we're going to be immediately more comfortable doing that when we're outside of this place. Because as with reading the scriptures and prayer and praise, we'll be in the habit of doing it together here. And we can help make it a normal aspect of Christian life. And so I like starting this workshop time by just engaging in that little bit of practice with one another. Just around, well, actually, your tables are probably a little bit, but find maybe I'll say groups of 3 or 4 people, and then just take a moment to say, over the course of the summer, this is one of the moments where I experienced God's presence. As open-ended as that. So you have a lot of spaciousness to think in different ways. It doesn't even necessarily have to be something that you experienced at church, but just over the course of the summer, here's one moment where I experienced God's presence. And each person will probably only have about a minute or two to share. We'll only take about, I'm going to say like five or so minutes to do this. I'll call you back. I'll talk a little more. We'll have some lunch. Very good. So 5 minutes, friends. back and we'll have one larger conversation together. And as we do so, I'll maybe, we'll try the clapping thing again, I suppose, yeah. Excellent. That'll work. So thank you everyone for engaging. And I'll just actually ask by show of hands, who found that exercise reasonably comfortable around your table? If you found it reasonably comfortable, raise your hand. Yeah, thank you. So most of us found that exercise reasonably comfortable. And one of the reasons for that is we know that this is a safe place to do so with people who largely share our spiritual perspective. And so it actually feels comfortable doing so with this group of people. One of the reasons I want to point that out is because that makes this a safe place to practice, right? It's a safe place for us to talk about our faith, because if you stumble over your words, no one's going to jump down your throat. If you make a little bit of a mistake, it'll be okay, right? And so that's one of the reasons that it's so good for us to get in the habit of sharing our stories of faith, talking about how God is present in our lives with others who share our perspective, because it helps us to grow in confidence. When we're talking about sharing with someone who doesn't already attend church, when we're talking about our friends and neighbors who aren't already here, who feels really comfortable doing that, talking about your faith in that situation, right? Only a few of us, right? So most of what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time is about, okay, how do we build up our capacity on that front? We want to be prepared to share our stories well. And I want to reassure you that that does not mean being prepared to go door to door so that your neighbors pretend they aren't there when you come knocking. It doesn't mean getting prepared to leave like little "Are you saved" pamphlets in restaurants instead of tips. My wife was a waitress, so I can attest to you that that is a thing that ever happened to her. Costs her money if someone does that, because she still has to tip out. And it turns out the cooks don't really want the pamphlet either. So, we're not preparing to do those things, and we're not preparing to do things like that because they lack a foundation in relationship. They lack real concern for the person that you're sharing with. And so we want to make sure that when we're talking about who we are as people of faith, it's because we're deeply invested in our relationships, because we want to be people who cultivate genuine care for our neighbors. And there are at least 4 principles that we can use to help us in taking that posture, right? Attitudes to cultivate in our hearts that will help us. And the first I like to call gentle openness. So gentle openness. And we begin talking about our faith in a short word that invites a curious question from someone else. And then we wait for that curious question to come before sharing more deeply. Right? If someone is wondering, what might that actually mean? What does that actually look like, sharing with gentle openness? It's really just about not hiding who you are as a person of faith. Right? A very common question that people will get asked is, what did you do this weekend? And I took my grandkids to the park on Saturday, and on Sunday I went to church. It's a totally natural conversation to that point, and it gives the person you're speaking with an opportunity to ask more about spirituality if they would like to. Right? If they say, how was the park? That isn't the time to say, actually, I really wanted to tell you about church. Right? Instead, you're offering them an opportunity to engage you in a conversation about faith, but not forcing one. So often, we edit that part out. And so when someone says, what did you do this weekend? We just say, I went to the park to play with my grandkids on Saturday. And we don't say anything about the church part. I'm encouraging you not to edit it out. Right? That's the courageous step piece. Right? And that doesn't mean pushing it, and that doesn't mean making that the only thing you want to talk about. It just means including your spirituality as a part of who you are. One of the reasons I think it's so life-giving to take that posture of gentle openness is that it enables you to share even more deeply who you are with your friends and neighbors. Right? You're sharing more authentically about something in your life that matters to you. And you're also identifying yourself as someone they could talk to about spiritual matters in the future. Right? If you are someone that names the fact that church is a part of who you are and that spirituality is a part of your life, people will say in the back of their mind, if I ever want to talk about that, I know I can ask. Right? And so even if it doesn't bear fruit right away, even if they don't immediately say, let me ask you about that, a couple of months or a couple of years down the road, they may well come to you and say, I'm going through a hard time. Can you actually tell me a little bit more about what church does for you in your life? If they do ask about your faith, they probably don't want to jump into a debate. Right? And so the second principle is speaking from your experience. Right? You're not likely trying to argue somebody into coming to church with you. Right? If you mention the fact that you go to church and they say, well, I don't want any part of that, I doubt that your response is going to be, yes, you do. I know you do. Right? Like that's not how the conversation is going to go. Instead, you're going to be a witness to the transformation that Christ has done in your life. Right? You're going to be a person who holds an expectation that the love and grace of God that you've experienced might extend to others. And so that story that you shared around your table can be the kind of thing you might say. Why do you go to church? Actually, it's a place where I experience God's presence. I remember one time when we were at church, we did X, and it was really meaningful to me. Right? You don't need to jump into theology. You don't need to worry about, well, what if they ask me about the Trinity and I can't have the perfect explanation? Like that's not necessary for you to be concerned about. Instead, you can talk about your personal experience. That's what your friends and neighbors are going to be most interested in anyway. So gentle openness, speaking from your experience. And that expectation that God might be doing something in the lives of the people you're in conversation with, that God might be moving in the conversations you're having with the people you're interacting with, you can cultivate that in your heart through prayer. And I mentioned that in the sermon today. And that third principle is praying for those you might invite. It allows you to think deeply alongside the Spirit of God about what that person might need. Deepens your level of care for them. And it gives you the space to offer and I acknowledge, perhaps uncomfortable prayer that you might have confidence in speaking with them about spiritual things. If you, as you were listening to today's service, said, I know exactly who I'm going to invite next week, I would really encourage you to pray for that person before you invite them, right? To be in a position where you're lifting them up to God so that as you go into conversation with them, you can know, I've prayed for this person's to have an experience of God's love. Right? It builds confidence in you, and it's just a good thing to be doing in general. So that third principle is prayer. And when you do get that opportunity to speak to someone about spiritual things, I'd really encourage you to make sure you're speaking with them rather than at them. That fourth principle is just openness to encountering the divine in the other. Right? Sometimes we're nervous that if we invite someone to become part of our spiritual community, that it would be like saying, we're the only ones who have anything to offer here and you have nothing. Please come and experience my thing with me. That's actually not the posture that we want to take at all. When we're engaged in a conversation about someone or with someone about spiritual things, you want to know that you might also find transformation there. That they also might have spiritual experiences that have a deep impact on you. It's good for you to be curious about those. In fact, we see that in the scriptures regularly, right? Both parties in a conversation about God and having their hearts directed back toward God in a new way. I think about Cornelius and Saul. Right? Cornelius is invited to go to this person, Saul, who has been persecuting the church, but who believes in God. And Cornelius is a little bit resistant. But he still sends the people to go. They gather Saul up, and Saul comes to meet Cornelius, and Saul says, why did you invite me here? And they neither of them really knows. They are in the process of learning together. They're in the process of being shaped by God together. And as they are shaped, God does new things within them. As Paul is healed, he comes to a totally different understanding of who Jesus is. As Cornelius sees Paul transformed, he comes into a new understanding of God's grace and how obedience, even when it's challenging, even when it's difficult, is really, really worth doing. And so we want to make sure that we remain open to encountering the divine in what others bring to us when we're in conversation about spiritual things. And it's when we can engage in those principles, when we're offering gentle openness, being open about our faith, but not in an overbearing way, when we're speaking from our own experience rather than trying to flog theology on people, when we're praying for those that we might invite to deepen our concern for them, and when we're open to encountering God in the face of the other, that our conversations with our friends and neighbors who may not agree with us can become really life-giving for us and life-giving for them, whether or not they end up coming to a service here at Kamloops United. And so I'm going to take a pause there, and we're going to grab something to eat off the table, and then I'll invite you to come back, and then we're going to have a conversation about, okay, but there's still some barriers that might prevent me from doing that. We're going to address those sort of head on in the next little section. So with that, maybe I'll say a brief prayer before the meal. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, great. God, we give you thanks for this time that we have together today to talk about how we might talk about you in ways that help us to experience your love and that help those around us experience your love. We also give you thanks for this food. We pray that it would bring energy to our bodies so that we might continue to do your good work in this world, both over the course of our workshop time together and as we go out into the rest of our day. Amen. So grab a sandwich, head back to your table.
And all of the other people.
And
Joan.
Joan Todd, she's not here.
She's
But
okay.
she was at
but
my
Jo-
house yesterday.
So we have sandwiches. You just want us to line up, pick up a sandwich, and go back to our
And a
spot.
pickle.
And a pickle. Sandwich and a pickle and a plate. Okay, let's go.
We're good. Okay. And so as we're eating, I will continue along with the next stage of our workshop together. And good. So we've spoken about the fact that being able to share our stories is one of the barriers that we sometimes face. Right? We've talked about that a little bit already, and we did that exercise in sharing to say, actually, you have more language to share than you think. Right? You can talk about your experience of church. You can talk about your experience of God in your life, and that will help you to feel more comfortable having the words to share, because you don't need to feel like there's one right way to do it. Instead, you can share from your own experience. But of course, that isn't the only barrier that we sometimes face. There are definitely some other barriers that can sometimes come up for us. And I'm going to name some of the ones that I think are pretty common in our churches. And then we're going to have some time together. If there's pieces we haven't spoken about, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask questions and say, what about this? One of the common barriers that we have is indifference. So by that I mean something like saying everyone has their own spiritual path and mine doesn't need to be theirs. Right? We actually don't care that much about where someone's finding their source of spirituality. We're happy for them if they find it somewhere in their lives, but theirs doesn't need to be mine. And so that sometimes prevents us from talking about our path. And I think that's a mistake. As you heard Michael allude to earlier, there are many people in our culture and our society who are looking for a pathway and who are looking for a guide, who are looking for some instruction about how they might walk a more spiritual life. It's one of the reasons that a lot of younger people, it's true in both the UK and in the United States right now, particularly among young men, are coming back into church circles and saying, maybe there's something there for me. They didn't grow up with church in their lives at all, so they don't have the baggage of some previous generations who maybe have had experiences of hurt in church. They're actually coming and saying, I don't know anything about this, and I'm kind of looking for something. And so it's, I think, important for us not to just say, it doesn't really matter what path people have. Everyone's going to have their own. But instead say, you know what? I think actually we have a good and vibrant spiritual path here, one that has impacted me in my life really positively. The other thing is there's increased openness in our society and just talking about different spiritual perspectives. So even if someone does have their own spiritual perspective and they end up not being interested in coming here, likely you'll end up in a really interesting conversation about your experience and theirs. Another thing that might lead us toward indifference about others joining us is a sentiment like, my Sunday morning worship is part of my spiritual practice, and I don't want to have the pressure of hosting somebody. Right? If you invite your friend to come, you want them to have a really good experience, and I will just flat out tell you that that is some amount of work. Right? You're walking alongside someone who's here for the first time. And that's a different experience than coming by yourself. I would just want to say that we are called as Christians to take a self-giving posture of love for others. And that hosting someone you've invited on a Sunday morning will actually help you to grow in your discipleship. Right? It'll help you to grow closer to the God that you want to follow. And it will illuminate your own experience of church as they begin to ask you questions about what's going on, as they reflect back to you something that you've just taken for granted, but that's new to them. There are really good reasons for us not to say, actually, this is a private part of my life that I want to just hold on to for me. Right? Church is very fundamentally not me time. Being in church is about us gathering together and being present for one another. And the more that we are engaged with that posture, almost paradoxically, the more that you yourself are going to get out of the experience, right? The more that we are engaged in that posture of togetherness, the better off we will actually be. So hopefully, that's not one that we articulate all that often, but I think it does play quite a lot in the minds of people who are in church, that posture of indifference. Another objection that sometimes gets raised is uncertainty. We've talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to say something about it with a little bit more depth, right? That idea of, I would love to invite my friend to church, but I have no idea how to make my faith a natural part of conversation. Or what if my friend asks a question and I don't know the answer, right? And that last one in particular, because we haven't talked about it yet, I want to say, like, that's such a great opportunity to be transformed together. I remember when I was first going to church when I was a teenager, I promised that my teenage friends who invited me did not have the answers to everything. They knew very little about the practice of their church community, and they had lots of questions themselves. But every time I asked a question, they were excited to try to find the answer together. Right? Questions from folks outside the church are a great gift, and they can spark shared growth. Right? You get to grow alongside the person you've invited. That sounds like a win. So try not to get too nervous about not knowing the answer for everything. In fact, they might help you to ask really good questions about your faith. And as you ask those questions, you might grow closer to God together. Another one, and I think this one's a pretty big one for people, is fear. The objection sometimes goes in someone's head. Christians have been trying to convert people for most of their history, and at times it's done enormous harm. And I don't want to be a part of that harm. Right? We're afraid that we might take part in the harm that our religious tradition has done to others. And I would just say being conscious of our history helps us to learn from it. But the lesson ought to be mutuality rather than timidity. Right? If your solution to the problem of Christians have been trying to convert people and it's done a lot of harm, so I just will never talk about my faith at all to solve that problem, you're right, you won't be part of that harm. And you'll also miss out on a lot of really great conversations with people that you're close to in your life about spiritual things. And so if we're going in with that attitude of openness to what the other person might offer as well, we're much less likely to do that harm. If we're coming with an attitude of curiosity about what others have already experienced and what they might have to teach us, then we are much more likely to be involved in gracious conversations that bring life than we are in a conversation that does harm. And if you end up in a conversation with someone who's been really hurt by the church, and you're taking that posture of openness and curiosity, you actually have an opportunity to bring great healing for them. Right? If they say, I don't know that I am really ready to even start thinking about going to church because when I was a child, the church really hurt me. And you can say, wow, I'm really sorry. As someone that attends church, I'm really sorry that was your experience. It's possible that they've never had anyone from the church apologize to them for the hurt that they've endured. And even though it's not you personally who caused it, hearing that from someone that's part of a religious denomination can really be life-giving for people, and can lead into a conversation that brings healing and hope. So the decision to just avoid means that opportunity to bring healing and hope doesn't exist. And so we want to be people who learn from our history, who make sure that we're engaging people in ways that will be good and life-giving and not do harm, but we don't want to totally pull back from sharing faith. Another thing that I think we can be fearful of is, what if my friend is offended that I've invited them to come and it hurts our relationship? I think it's a big one for people, right? What if this leads to our relationship deteriorating because I invited them to church. And I want to let you know that although that's a real concern, it's extremely unlikely that that's going to be the path things go down if you invite someone once. Right? Most people will not be offended if you're following the principle of gentle openness and you're listening well. Right? They might get offended if you're the person that says, I know you asked me about the park, but I'm going to tell you about my church anyway. Right? That might lead them to say, you know what, this is getting pushy and I don't like it. But if we're able to lean into those principles, it's very unlikely that people will get offended. If someone does, and we take some moment to reflect and we say, actually, it turns out that I've shared in an inappropriate way, we can apologize. And in my experience, most of the time, if you're in a good relationship with somebody and you do something that offends them a little bit and then you apologize, there isn't a lot of lasting harm that comes from that. In fact, it can serve to draw you together. If their offense comes not from your sharing, and it's not because you've done something inappropriate, but they're just set off by the mere mention of Christianity, then I think it's really important to listen carefully to their story. If someone has that big of a reaction, then you can say something like, I want to let you know that I'm hearing that you have some hurt that you're carrying. I promise that I won't raise this again. If you need someone that's a safe person that you can do some unpacking with, I can be there for you. And then you can leave it at that. And generally speaking, people will again find that sort of openness to be a pretty attractive posture. And so it would certainly be my hope that the majority of the time when you're sharing your faith with somebody, it actually leads to closer relationship rather than broken relationship. And where in the unlikely event that it does lead to some measure of hurt rising up in someone, that if we take a posture of love and kindness and compassion, that it might actually end up still being beneficial in the longer term. The last one that I'm going to mention before we move into some opportunity for questions is discouragement. And I think this is a barrier not often for people at first, but especially if you've tried it a few times, right? I tried inviting a friend and I learned that's not an area where I have a spiritual gift. Or I've invited friends to church before and they don't come, so what's the point? Right? That discouragement that we can sometimes experience can feel really difficult for us. One of the reasons that I think an event like next week is really helpful is that you can know that you're not the only one here who's planning to invite someone to church that day. That actually a lot of people in your community are going to invite someone to church, and very likely some of you will receive a yes. And so to understand the invitations that you're offering as being part of a greater project that you're engaged in together. And so when you see 4 or 5 new faces in church, or 10 or 11 new faces in church, or even 1 or 2 new faces in church on any given Sunday, you can say, wow, we're doing well together. And that helps people to feel more encouraged about the prospect of sharing their faith when they start to see that it's actually bearing fruit across the community as a whole. The other thing I would want to say is that we're all called to engage in the different practices of Christian life, right? Some people are going to be really gifted at sharing their faith, and like God bless them in their giftedness. They are going to be the ones that offer leadership for us as they engage in those gifts well. But just like how some people are really gifted in prayer, they're not the only ones who pray. Some people are really gifted in hospitality, but they're not the only ones who are hospitable. right? We're all called to pray. We're all called to hospitality. We're all called to sharing our faith. In a lot of ways, I like the analogy of a swimming pool where people who are particularly gifted in any given area, they're like jumping into the deep end and swimming around and saying, come on deeper, it's so fun, it's great, it's great. And we're inspired by the way in which they can do that. And then all of us are called to at least splash around in the shallow end, right? All of us are called to engage in those regular practices of Christian life. And by doing so, we actually come to find that we're enlivened. And sometimes we can take tentative steps just a little bit deeper. And in the process, go deeper in our relationship with God. The other thing that is good to note is that we are called to faithfulness in invitation. In many instances, people will be invited multiple times before they attend. One really a gentle question that you can ask is, would it be okay if I invited you another time? And that way you can hear what they say, right? If someone says, no, I would prefer you didn't invite me again another time, then you know. Okay, I can leave this alone in this relationship for a good long time. If the person says, sure, you can invite me again another time, that's fine. Then you can go, okay, that is maybe something that's worth keeping in mind. Since I started this job, I end up going up to Edmonton to visit my parents fairly regularly. And we attend a church, the same church when we're in Edmonton. And when I was the minister in Viking, I baptized someone's children who no longer lived in Viking, but lived in Edmonton. And so whenever we are in Edmonton and going to church, I'll send her a text to invite her to come to church with us. She always says no. Always. She has not yet come once, and I think I've probably invited her 8 or 9 different times. But after about the 6th time I invited her, she sent me a text back saying, please don't stop inviting me to come to church. We really do want to go sometime. Right? It would have been easy for me to get discouraged after the 4th time and say, I'm done with this, right? But she knows it's something she wants to do. She's having trouble finding a way to fit it in. And I get to be the person in her life that reminds her of something she's told herself. Right? I want church to be a part of my life. Right. Scott's texting me again. I still want church to be a part of my life. I wonder if we can fit it in this week. And so I'll continue to doing that. Right? I'll continue to offer that invitation exactly because it's what she has indicated will be helpful to her. And so, don't tell yourself, once I've invited someone once and they've said no, that's it. If it helps to check in with them and then they say, please don't invite me again, great. Listen to that, absolutely. But a surprising number of people will say, not this time, but maybe sometime. And there's real openness in that maybe. And quite often, people will end up coming at some point. If you continue to ask, because your continued asking is a demonstration that you're listening and caring. Right? I heard you say maybe, and I continue to care about you, so I'm going to invite you again. That doesn't necessarily mean inviting them every single week. One of the things that we can do as church is to think carefully about, okay, like what do we have coming up on the church calendar, right? And so like, if you have a friend of yours that you've been meaning to invite to church and they love Downton Abbey, boy, do I know which Sunday you should invite them to church, right? If you have a friend and you know that they really love Christmas, Christmas Eve might be the service to invite them to. And if you have a friend and you know that their grandkids come to visit them every Easter and they're looking for things to do, Easter Sunday might be the service to invite them, right? You can try to figure out, okay, what are the days where we're doing something specific as a church community where it's going to make lots of sense for us to invite someone. One of the reasons that I think it's helpful for you to have a Sunday like next Sunday is because for some people, they can be nervous that they might be the only new person there. And so you can invite them with confidence, saying, we expect that there's going to be quite a few people who are there for the first time. And so you won't need to feel like you're singled out. And in fact, some of the service can be tailored to people who are there for the first time. And so this is a great opportunity for you to come and learn, right? If you've ever been interested in just coming and learning about what the United Church is like, what a United Church worship service is like, this is a great opportunity to do that. We do have one other piece that we're going to do to end that has to do with prayer. But before I do that, that folks have, this actually has a mic for us, pieces that you feel nervous about, things that you'd love for me to respond to in the whole group.
Number 2.
Scott, whenever I'm asked about the United Church, my answer usually is about the brick and mortar of the church, of the thrift store, the wonderful engaging ministers, about the choir and this and that. Somehow my spirituality or religion doesn't come into the picture. How do I get into that?
So just to make sure that I'm understanding clearly, like people are specifically asking you about the building or specifically asking you about the the feeding ministry? Okay. Yeah. So I would say it's just a matter of both listening carefully. So if they're asking you specifically about those things, talk about those things. That's great. There's nothing wrong with doing that at all. And I think it's good and right for you to say something along the lines of, and this is why the church has been a place where I have found spiritual connection, and being able to talk about that part of your experience. Most people, if they're asking you about your spiritual community, want to hear about why it matters to you. And it might matter to you because of the space is beautiful. The minister delivers really inspiring sermons. The music is wonderful. But then being able to personalize that a little bit more, right? So the music is wonderful. When I have an opportunity to sing with people, I feel this way, and then being able to say how you feel, and then maybe even. And I remember one time on Christmas Eve when we sang whatever it is you sang, and then talking about your experience of that. Our minister is really wonderful. I love listening to his messages. That's a good place to start. You need one more sentence, right? I remember one time when Michael spoke about X, it really changed the way I understood this part of my life. And that's been hugely transformational for me, right? So being able to talk to start with what they're asking about and then talk about why it matters to you personally, I think is really helpful. Any other folks with objections to sharing your faith that we haven't addressed yet? Things that are pulling on your heart that are saying, I still don't know if I'm ready to do this, that you'd like to voice?
Is this on? Yeah.
Yep.
Scott, what if we go through all of this and next Sunday we only see 2 new faces? How should we feel and how should we go forward?
Yeah, really good question. I think that one of the things that's most important is to remember that what you're pointing toward here is an outcome as a goal rather than an activity. So the outcome that you're hoping for is many new people are present in church. You actually just don't have control over that, right? And so whenever we're engaging in this practice of invitation, we're asking for the love and grace of God to be present in the hearts of people, and that experience of grace is what's going to lead them to be present here. So I would say that first, right? How should you feel? You should feel like God's grace has brought 2 people into our midst. How wonderful, right? And if that feels like a good thing, then lean into that. If that feels like a disappointing number, and I guess that's what I'm getting. If that feels like it's like, oh, we have a disappointing amount of people who've come for the first time, then it's worth just going back over and saying, okay, are we engaging well? Are we engaging faithfully in these principles? Are we helping to equip people in a good way, so that they can feel comfortable speaking with their friends and their neighbors? You go back to the beginning and just make sure the parts that we actually can control, the activities, like this workshop is an activity, we're completely in control of whether or not we have it. Are we doing the things we need to do in order for people to feel like, yeah, we're giving this our best effort? And where there are places where you notice that you could do things differently, then changing it up. But overall, yeah, like recognizing that we're hoping for something that we don't have full control over, and that's okay, and that as we continue to engage, we'll likely get better at it. Just as with anything else where you're practicing, for some of you, maybe inviting people to church, talking about your faith feels really comfortable, but I only saw a few hands come up, right? And so as you start to engage in it, you will have some really encouraging moments, and you need to practice in order to get better at it. Others, any comments or questions from folks? One over there.
Whenever I talk about our church, I actually talk about how my parents were married here, that the church has been part of our community for so many different years. We just celebrated our 100th anniversary. And I also talk about how it's my children that enjoy and they want to go, and that they have fun doing the activities, and that they really feel like the ministers make them feel like they're part of this church, and they involve them. And the fact that, Michael talks to them, one-on-one and that kind of stuff, because most of the people that I'm talking to have kids and are looking for something positive for their kids. So that's usually what I talk about.
Yeah, it's great, right? So like, again, you're speaking about your own experience of what this church has been in your life and in the lives of your children. And that's, I think, an excellent way to speak about your faith. And so, if you're here and you're saying, I actually don't have kids, that, yeah, you would speak about it differently, probably. Yeah. Any others before we move into our last exercise? Very good. One of the principles I mentioned earlier is prayer. And sometimes we can find it hard to know what to pray. And so, as with sharing your faith, it can be helpful to just practice. And so as you look ahead, I will invite you to think of a specific person that you might invite. And then I'm just going to lead us through a guided prayer for that individual. And so it's a way for us to practice praying together for those that we might invite. So we're just going to take 1 minute, and it might feel short for some of you, might feel long for some of you, 1 minute, to think of a person that you might invite to come next Sunday. And so as we begin, I encourage you to close your eyes and to breathe deeply. We'll take 3 breaths together in and out. In and out. In and out. Then I'll ask you to envision the person you're thinking of inviting to church in detail if you can. Remember the way they look when they smile. Remember the reasons you give thanks for this person. Remember the things about this person that remind you that they are created in the image of God. I invite you to pray with me now. God, please touch this person with Christ's light and love, and prepare both me and them to encounter that light and love anew when I speak about you and our church. And I would invite you now to visualize this person filled and surrounded by the light of Christ's love. And bring your hands together with your palms cupped, as if you're holding the person in love. And as you hold your hands in this posture, you can visualize God's hands coming together to hold that person in the palms of God's hands, still filled and surrounded by the warmth and light of Christ's love. As you continue to hold this posture, we'll pray, and after I finish praying aloud, I'll leave a few seconds of silence for you to silently add anything you wish to the prayer. O great and merciful God, creator and giver of all life, source of all kindness and love, we recognize the work of your Spirit in the life of this person. May I see your image revealed in them, and may they come to experience you more deeply through our relationship and through the ministry of our church. Finally, I'll invite you to visualize the person remaining in God's hands as you gently move your hands apart and open your eyes. Amen. Friends, if you're like me, you like having a couple of action items as you go from this place. So I would say there's 3 things that you can do beyond just saying 3 things you can do that are in your control, right? You can share your faith sometimes this week with a Christian friend, right? Engage in that practice with a safe person that helps you build up your confidence. You can continue praying for someone you might invite. And you can name your connection to Kamloops United Church in conversation with one of the people that you're praying for. And if they ask a curious question about it, you can invite them to come, find belonging here, and engage in the kind of spiritual community that you yourself find so life-giving. Friends, thank you so much for this time together. I appreciate it a lot. Michael's going to come and say a thing, I think.
Scott, I first of all just want to say thank you very much to you and for being here today, and we certainly appreciate it. So let's just... There are a couple of other people I would like to say thank you to, Sakshi and Joe, for all of the work. They've done work behind the scenes for today. Sakshi is our welcome coordinator, and she has been working on this process since January. And so we just want to say, let's say thank you to Sakshi. And also thank you to Joe, who is... they have a lot of meetings. I'm not sure what they do at their meetings, but they have a lot of meetings, but we're really appreciative of the work that they do. We've said thank you very much to those who, the hospitality team. There are sandwiches there. If you would like to take a sandwich home, that would help us. We also are sending a tray of sandwiches to Pit Stop for people to take there, but there's a lot of sandwiches. So please feel free to take a sandwich. And to Doug and Sue, you have been sitting there for a long time. We want to say over 3 hours, we thank you. We just say thank you very much. And and thank you to all of you. And we just entrust the process now into the hands of God's Spirit. So thank you.